Well, hello and welcome back to Read Becca. It's once again time for my weekly chatty catch up on everything I've read, everything I'm currently reading, and everything I'm looking forward to reading, as well as some general lifey chit chat and catch up on my week. As you can see, I'm not in front of my regular shelves for no real good reason other than there were a bunch of people outside the window where I normally am. So we're in the office in front of the big, generally fantasy shelf, but not favorites. So this week I had a good reading week. But once again, I am in a hurry, so we're gonna somewhat rapid fire, though short things to wrap up, thankfully. First, I have Lessons from Cats for Surviving Fascism by Stewart, Brittlestar, Reynolds. And this was adorable. It's teeny tiny. I think this is one of several books I've read that are behaviors framed through cat behavior. And I liked this. It's probably not anything memorable. Every chapter has sort of a front piece with a title and then about 2 to 3 pages of regular standard text. So it's not totally insubstantial, but it's things like taking up space and being disruptive and being your own boss. So I feel like the lessons were very applicable, and I think this was a great version of what it's doing. I really enjoyed it and found it funny and quirky, while also, it has some reinforcement in insights about resisting. So I think there was some substance there, but also, as I said, it's probably not going to really stick with me significantly. So I don't know where to put this because it was enjoyable. It was a very good version of what it's doing, but I don't think it's going to be like my favorite book of the year. So I'm glad I picked it up. I think this only came out fairly recently. Yeah, 2026. And so I had it on hold forever until it finally came in, and it was a very quick little read. And then we have one that has been talked about on BookTube a lot and is very kind of, I would say, controversial. Hunchback by Saou, Ichikawa, and translated by Barton, who's a translator I've enjoyed before, but this is a new author to me, and this is a little novelette. I would say it's 90 pages. So I found this to be interesting in that it's been talked about on BookTube all over, as I said, because it's such a prickly book. It's got some topics in here that are really difficult to tackle. And I think fiction is the right place to tackle those topics. So we're following a woman who is disabled and lives in care facilities. And she also is expressing her sexual identity by writing erotic fiction online. And she's getting paid for that, but she also has an inheritance. So she's very financially stable and well off, yet she doesn't have all of these other sort of well-being aspects of her life taken care of or feel her needs are being fully met. And then she meets a caregiver at the place where she lives who is there to take care of her, and he knows who she is and her writings. And that's kind of the general elevator pitch that everyone gives. But what I would say is this is much less narrative than that. This is kind of open-ended, and because it's so short, it felt like we were about halfway through before that really even started to happen. So that story wasn't actually that big of a part of this book. And really, this is such an open-ended glimpse into this woman's life that I felt like I was getting much more about her feelings about things. And she was sending tweets out about things that were quote-unquote normal that she wanted to do. And so a huge element of this, of what she's thinking about in the story of this, if there is one, is that she wants to have sex because she's a virgin despite having written all of this erotica, but she wants to have sex and she wants to get pregnant, and she wants to have an abortion because she can't physically carry a baby, but her reproductive system as it is intact, it seems, and she has this really strong draw to the sense of that's a normal bodied thing that I can do. And so I think there are a lot of things about that people will push back from and really respond to strongly emotionally. And I think that's great to grapple with in thinking about all of those aspects. One of the things that I think I bounced off of this is that I've read Convenience Store Woman. I think that was doing a lot of things about personal autonomy and being othered outside of society in a more nuanced way because it has more space than this does. We also have that relationship with the caregiver guy, and we didn't really explore the power dynamics there, which I found kind of concerning, yet they seemed to work through what they were doing, but there just isn't room for that. So I wanted more from that, and I felt like I got that from the book Convenience Store Woman. There's also an element that this kind of makes, the pitch kind of makes that sound like it's going to be a good or even a fair relationship, but it's kind of a contentious, abrasive relationship. Like, she's kind of put off by him. And so they're entering into this relationship of convenience because he's there, because he knows, because he's willing, rather than because either of them actually wants it, really, it seems. And so I wanted that, again, to be explored more. I feel like there was so much room to grow, and it was just so short. It didn't have room to explore any of the areas. And so that was the disappointment. But what I did really like is that it put all of those thoughts in my head to start thinking and exploring those ideas and what I wanted to get out of it into my head. So I was thinking about it. So as I said, it was kind of a prickly book that is going to stick with me and has a lot of, it's like got a coarse sandpaper feel to this book. So I think I enjoyed it overall, but again, I don't think this is cohesive as a book enough or doing enough exploring in the nuances for me personally, but I think it incites a lot of great thoughts. And lastly, I have a nonfiction. That is The Great Contradiction, The Tragic Side of the American Founding by Joseph J. Ellis. And this was great. This is also quite short, and so I think this is an accessible entry point into this topic. And this topic is the founders' understanding of non-white persons. So Indigenous people and enslaved people. I think this was really interesting because it is tackling that. Even things like the Islamic aspect of people that were being forcibly immigrated here as slaves, being here in the 1600s is not something that we really talk about significantly, but they're here. The fact that a significant portion of the population at the time of the founding of the US was in fact Black, and yet we don't really think about that. We think very, very in terms of the white people that were visible in our mythologized depictions, yet every one of these people had a household full of slaves for the most part. So I think there's a passage I want to read that really encapsulates the book's very well, the topic here. And this is from a man named Pinckney of South Carolina. Quote, "Another reason weighed heavily on the members of this state against the insertion of a Bill of Rights," he revealed. "Since such bills generally began by declaring that all men aren't by nature born free, and we should make that declaration with very bad grace when the large part of our property consists in men who are actually born slaves." End quote. There was, in effect, a fundamental disagreement over what had happened in Philadelphia, which exposed different understandings of the decisions to extend the slave trade and different expectations about the fate of slavery itself. The more mainstream view in most northern states and in pockets of Virginia was that there was an agreement to defer the whole slavery question until 1808, when the slave trade was likely to end. In the states of the Deep South, the consensus was that they had been assured that even if the slave trade ended after 20 years, the newly installed federal government had no authority to impose any restrictions on their invaluable enslaved laborers. The northern states, whether they knew it or not, had agreed to live with the contradiction forever. So I loved the aspect that this remained very focused on that element. This is totally and completely focused on the founders and their understanding of their world, and the fact that they were really very overtly grappling with that discussion in their conversations. Though, interestingly, there's a lot about the Constitutional Convention surrounding discussing and writing over years that they didn't record. Many of these meetings, they explicitly said, we can't record this, because they were a mess. And so they were going through this very messy process to write these things and saying things that, didn't reflect nicely. And sadly, we don't have a lot of that. But what we do have is so interesting and fascinating to me. I think what I came away with this the most is just how much so many of these men were internalizing how much they were ready for that change, but they thought no one else would support it. And so it was almost like if they had pushed, if they had vocalized more, like we might have seen real strides, but they were too afraid to step out and, put themselves in potential financial hardships even in order to say the radical thing. And it really did surprise me just how forward thinking so many of these people were, that, oh yeah, they recognized this is wrong and we need to change this. They just thought it wouldn't pass if they tried to do it. So that's very deeply saddening. So I think that this, as I said, is a really great starting point. And it talks about that aspect of slavery at the founding. It also talks about the relationships with the indigenous peoples that were surrounding the area, and just how much, again, they're very whitewashed out of being parts of these communities and being surrounding all of these areas where they were everywhere. And really it was illness that the colonists brought with them that sort of decimated the population. It was an apocalypse that led to there not being a lot of indigenous people around, rather than them originally not having been there and it just being an open expanse. And so it talks through a lot of really nuanced things and how those came to be ingrained in the founding. But I wanted to pull this out as well because I have another book that I've read. I kind of read backwards a bit because I read this, I think, last year. The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path Toward a Shared American Future by Robert P. Jones. So this one is history, but it also has that path. It has the recommendations for how we can make changes. This one I feel is a great starting point, and this is something that really builds on that. So this book, I would say, is not focused on the founding, it's focused on the path to getting there. And it's so much more about the European mindset and ideals coming into colonization and imperialization, and how all of those things became a baseline for the US founding documents. And this is, again, very, very focused and narrow. So I think these two pair really nicely together. If you have a chance to read one or both, I would highly recommend both of them on this topic. So that is everything that I read this week. So what I'm reading right now, I have a couple things. I'm still working on Jane Eyre, and I'm so close, but I didn't want to rush through the last little bit just to finish it today, but I will be almost certainly finished with it. And then I have started on Women in Science, 50 Fearless Pioneers Who Changed the World by Rachel Ignatowski. And then I also am listening to an audio, Sweet and Sour Spells, I think. It's either Spells or Magic by Jess Rosenberg. So I've been having a little struggles with picking books to read because I've been starting and reading a few chapters here and then like not being into it and switching over to something else. So I've been flitting around a lot, but these are mainly the things I've actually been reading. And then I think that's it for my books for the week. I also watched one movie, or a play, a filmed play, a formally, like not casually filmed staged play, Merrily, We Roll Along, which I had not seen before. Jonathan Groff is amazing. I love him. And then the guy who played Harry Potter is in it also. But it's really interesting, and I'm a little conflicted about how I feel on the play because it is on Netflix, so it's available out there widely. It's very discordant, I think is what I would get across. And that's both in the story, like the narrative is very discordant and abrasive, but also the music is discordant. And I don't always get along with that. This is also set in the 70s. Most of it, I think it's actually goes back into the 60s and 70s. And I don't love that time period very much, so I didn't end up entirely loving it. But I think it's really cool and interesting, and I like the performances because the whole story of this is these two playwrights who have gained massive success. And we start sort of from the end and work backward as we follow that narrative of them coming from nothing to gain success and wild fame. And Jonathan Groff is the sort of lead guy who his head gets too big, basically, and he ruins his life and just gets too into the wealth and status and all of that and ruins everything. And so we start with him being this guy that everybody is fawning over because of his wealth and power. And then we're watching all of the things that have broken down and how he's lost friendships and loves in his life and all of that jumping backwards. And it's so interesting the way that's set up. But man, the process of everybody like fighting with him and him being a jerk to everyone, like that is less enjoyable to watch, I think. And the musical performance were great, but again, that discordant note being there through the whole thing, I just wanted some like ballads and stuff. And this is very like real hard, really, really 60s and 70s thing. So I think it was middle of the road, but it was also a little over long because it's 2.5 hours, which is pretty normal for a stage play, but it felt long given that I just wasn't loving anything very exuberantly. So anyway, I think that's all I finished watching for this week. Lots of things in progress though. I'm watching so many things because like it feels like everything is actively running right now. So I'm watching so many things week to week that are coming out. And I think that's all I have for you for today because again, my time is short and as always, I have talked on. So I will with that say, I hope you have a wonderful week in reading and in life. And thank you so very much for watching.